Hello everyone and welcome to this week's episode of Behind the Frame. In this series, myself and fellow guides choose an image that we've taken out in the field and we bring it into the studio. We sit here and we share the moment behind the photograph with you all, as well as some of our editing techniques in Lightroom with all of you. This week I'm going to be editing an image that I took at Sabi last year in October, where I hosted a private safari. It's a nice close-up tight shot of a male lion's face. I hope that you all enjoy this video. So jumping straight into this image, this is the image that I'm talking about. You can see it in full. It's nice. It's got a nice, very intense stare, looking straight at me, and this is where it comes down to. I always talk to guests about what is the reason behind you picking up your camera to take a photograph, as opposed to just lifting, pointing, and shooting. And for me in this situation, it was the male lion's eyes. He was fixated on us, staring at us. Just to give you a little bit of background, what happened in the sighting was that this male lion was accompanied by 3 lionesses. They attempted to hunt some zebras. They were unsuccessful. All 4 of the lions were very, very hungry. There was also a herd of buffalo close by, a small herd of buffalo close by that they were interested in, hence why this male lion's got such an intense stare on its face. And that's what I really loved in this photograph and what I really wanted to enhance. So if we look at the image itself, so you will see I've got this intense stare here, but what I wanted to do was to just show you what I mean by the intense stare. So you can have a look at my settings here, top left, shooting at an ISO of about 2000. It was an overcast day, so the light was fairly flat. You can see a little bit of light on the left, or our left hand side of the frame, coming through there, but high ISO to allow me to have a fast shutter speed. Not necessarily for this shot. This shot doesn't need 0.002 of a second for the photograph itself. The reason why it's so fast is because of the action-packed morning we had with these lions. They were constantly moving around. As I mentioned, they attempted to hunt some zebras. They were then fixated on a small group of buffalo close by. So the potential for them to get up and move and hunt was very, very high. So I wanted to ensure that I had a high shutter speed so that if the moment changed and they got up and they moved, that I would be able to freeze any sort of action. I've gone for f4 here. You can see this is a fixed 400 2.8 lens. I went with f4 for a nice narrow depth of field. And I wanted to leave a little bit of room for error. So what I mean by that is, by shooting at f4 as opposed to 2.8, if my focus was just slightly off, at this distance, it will still give me the outcome that I'm looking for. And in this case, it's to emphasize that eye contact. If he happened to get up and move, I could have easily dialed up my aperture value as well as my ISO to keep my shutter speed nice and fast. But he took a couple of minutes where he sat down and he was just staring at us. And when I say at us, the herd of buffalo was a couple of 100 yards away from us, but behind us, and you could hear them bleating and communicating, and that's what got his attention and why he was staring at us like this. So just to get back to the image in terms of an edit, the first thing that I always do is I check the edges of the frame. I check my histogram here. Okay, you'll see that there's quite a few dark areas in the image, around the eyes, in the mane, around the mouth, the nose. And what I'm trying to do here is just have a look. Okay, I haven't burnt out any of the dark areas, so that's fine. So all the detail in these dark areas are still preserved. So after looking at the histogram, I'm going to go for a crop. Okay, I noticed that there's this leaf at the top left hand side of the frame, so I am quite picky, so I'm going to take that away, I can either use the removal tool, the spot removal tool, or I can go for a different kind of crop. Now, looking at this image, it would be I would think it would be a great image to post to social media, Instagram. So I would go for a 4x5 crop on this image. So come in here, 4x5, bring it down. That leaf is automatically eliminated. One thing for me though, the intense stare is looking straight at me, but I do like the eyes to line up with one another. So he's looking straight towards me, and that's the crop I can go for. I could have also used this tool, the angle tool, and gone from pupil to pupil. Gives me a bit of more of an accurate reading, but I'm happy with that crop. I'm not too worried about clipping the hair at the bottom here. That's not the main focus of my photograph. I eliminated that green leaf, which was a bit distracting to the eye, and now I can focus on this intense stare that we've got going on in the face here. So I always love images like this because they do tell a story, and it's very difficult to describe in words what it's like when you're out in the field and you're sitting a couple of yards away from this beautiful male lion and he's staring directly at you with these big eyes. It can be a bit intimidating, humbling, but to be in that moment and to realize you're in that moment is really, really special. So for me, the whole reason why I picked up my camera was because of the eye contact. So what I want to do here is I want to enhance the eye contact. We go back to the image here. So we go to the basic menu. It obviously gives you all the different options here. I'm fairly happy with the color of the image. I like it. Like I said, it was an overcast day, so the light was fairly flat, but it was decent light, and it actually gave a nice warm glow to the image. Not overpowering, but I'm very, very happy with the light. So I'm not going to adjust the white balance here at all. I'm going to shoot straight down. For me, these are the most important sliders in the basic menu. Highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. And the reason why I say that is because this is where I can create contrast. I don't like to use the contrast slider to create contrast because that goes throughout the image, and I sometimes feel it gives it a little bit of an unnatural feel, whereas I like to create contrast using those 4 sliders. Not necessarily all of them in an image, but highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. So I'm going to shoot straight down to the whites and blacks. Now if I hold down Alt and start lifting the whites, when you start to see that come through, that tells me, if you look at the histogram, look at the histogram when I'm sliding this across. So you'll see I start to wash out those white areas. So we want to bring it back to a point where it is before it starts to get washed out. What I'm trying to say is that I don't want to lose any detail in the white areas. Then we come to the blacks. The blacks, I'm already clipping the nose here, ever so slightly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my finger away from Alt, and I'm just going to use my natural eye to lift the shadows a little bit. So I'm lifting those dark areas, but now remember, I wanted to bring contrast into this area. So by lifting shadows, it's just creating a lighter image. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the black slider where originally I was clipping. I can now bring it back down, and what that does is just it reinforces the dark areas. So the very dark areas, like in this image, the nose, the mane, around the eyes, it just adds that contrast and that darkness back into the eye. So I'm going to bring the black down a little bit, okay, so to something like that. Now if we do a before and after, look at that difference. So all we've done is we've done a crop, a 4x5 crop, and we've played with the shadows, the whites, and the blacks, and that's what we get out of it. Pretty incredible. We can also go down to the tone curve if you want a little bit more in terms of contrast, and let's lift highlights here slightly, lights slightly, and then darks I'm going to bring down ever so slightly here again. Now if we do a before and after, look at that contrast. And it still looks very, very natural. Now you can see shooting at f4, this section of the male lion is blurred, so the foreground being the nose and the background being the top of the head is blurred, which is exactly what I was going for in this image because I wanted to have the intensity in the eyes. So going back to it, my next step here would be to underneath here, underneath the brush, we've got a whole bunch of different masking tools that we can use. We can select the subject. Once again, then whatever I do, I'm doing to the whole, to my whole image, because the subject fills the frame. Sky, there's no sky. Background, there's no background. So I'm not going to be using any of those sliders here. Remember, what I wanted to do was to work on the eyes, and I really want them to kind of pop and show off their intensity. So I'm going to use this brush. The feather I'm going to lift slightly, and what I'm going to do is over these sharp areas. So it's mainly the eyes. You've got to remember your depth of field. So the reason why I've marked it like that is so that if you think of it, your depth of field sits like this. So if f4 is like this, that's across your image. Across the entire part of your image. So obviously the lion's face is the same as my head, it's looking straight at you. If I'm focused on the eyes, I might not have the nose in focus, but everything in line with the eyes and within that depth of field is going to be in focus. And that's why I've spread this, brush tool right across from one eye to the other. So I've highlighted the eyes. What I'm going to do here now, press O for overlay, get rid of that, and then I'm going to come in here, and I always typically like just to add a little bit of sharpness, not much. I mean, it's already pin sharp. Some clarity. What clarity does is, once again, it just adds the contrast. So I'm looking for a lot of contrast, a little bit of texture as well. I'm looking for a lot of contrast in this image to really get these eyes to pop. So that's pretty much sharpened. What you've got to remember about sharpening and clarity is sharpens the entire section highlighted, if that makes sense, whereas clarity does the edges, and that's where clarity adds to the contrast of your photograph. So going back to the photograph, I'm very happy with that. I'm going to create another brush, and what I'm going to do with this brush before I get to the eyes, now the eyes is where I'm going to finish off on, but just to add a little bit more contrast, I'm going to go over these dark areas. You see under the eye there's a dark area. Just for this, I'm going to increase my feather just so that it blends a little bit better. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go over these dark areas of fur on the mane, around the eyes, down the side of the mane, all around these dark areas. I know this is looking pretty odd, but you'll see the reasoning behind it. Remember, I'm all about contrast and intensifying the eyes of the image. Okay, so almost there, under this eye. An interesting fact, you'll see under the eye they've got this white strip here. So for those of you that don't know, lions, leopards have it. The reason behind it is they are more nocturnal animals, and what this white strip underneath the eyes does is actually it absorbs light from the night sky, so from the stars, the moon, and it gives them about 6 times better eyesight than ours at night. Just an interesting fact. Going back to the image, I've highlighted these key areas that I want to make a little bit darker. There is part of the mane here as well. Because what you've got to remember with every image is that your eye is always drawn to the brightest part of an image, the area with the most contrast, and the sharpest area. So in an image like this, what area do you think that's going to be now with all these adjustments that I'm making and the way that the image is coming out? It's going to be the eyes and around the face. This area is the sharpest point, it's the area with most contrast, and it's also the brightest area of the photograph. Press O for overlay, take that away. What I'm going to do here, I'm just going to bring the blacks down ever so slightly. And remember, if you're unsure of what a slider does, you can literally slide it side to side and get a feel for what it does, and then it gives you a better understanding of what you can do with it. And here is just a very minor adjustment. That's all I'm going to do to those dark areas, and press enter. Now I'm going to do a little bit of magic. I'm going to work on the eyes of the animal. So I shot at an ISO of 2000, which is fairly high. There isn't really any noise or grain in the eye, but what I like to do is just to use the brush, go over each eye, potentially lift the shadows a little bit, just to make the eyes pop. I'll use the noise slider just to create that smooth, clean look over their eye, and then once again, just with the clarity slider, shift it slightly just to intensify that look. So that's what we're going to be going for here. So I'm going to select the brush again. I'm going to make my feather slightly smaller, and then we are going to zoom in to the eyes. You can see it's pretty sharp already, and all I'm going to do is just go around these areas, but you got this nice glint in the eye here, and like I said, it is nice and sharp. This one's in a bit of shade or shadow, so I'm going to definitely use the noise slider just to tone it down a little bit. Let's make sure the whole eye is selected. Okay, let's zoom out. Okay, so press O for overlay. Now I'm going to lift the shadows. You can see what it does to the eye on the right hand side especially, so it's going to be quite a dramatic shift in the slider. I'm going to increase exposure slightly. Okay, it's all about the small adjustments. You make a lot of small adjustments, and you'll come out with an image that pops. Remember, I mentioned noise slider. I'm going to lift that, let's say, about 12. There wasn't really any noise in the eyes anyways, but just to give it that smooth, clean look, as I mentioned earlier, and then a little bit of clarity. So now press enter, enter, enter. Looking at this image, I also often tell guests not to over edit an image. Edit it just doing minor adjustments. Rather do fewer adjustments than more adjustments, because you can always add to the image, but you never want to create an unnatural looking image. You want that natural feel throughout the image. So looking at it again, this is before, this is after. Look at how we've just created the image where those eyes pop out nicely. What we're essentially doing here is we are flicking the light inside out. And as you can see, there wasn't many adjustments that I did to this image or to the specific image, but I'm really happy with the outcome. The whole purpose of it was to really bring out the eyes, which I think I've done quite nicely in the image, and just to get them to pop. So this is an image that stands out to me that I absolutely love. I love eye contact from any animal. It just really creates that X factor in an image, especially when you've got a male lion like this, where you think about a male lion, they're big, they're strong, they're powerful, they're incredible animals, and to get an animal like this male lion in the photograph fixated, looking straight towards you, it really is an impressive feeling, and it's like I mentioned earlier, a very difficult feeling to describe. So in terms of editing this image, I wouldn't do anything more to this image. I'm happy with the image as it is. I eliminated the distractions that I didn't like by a simple crop, moved a couple of sliders, the blacks, the whites, the shadows to create a bit of contrast, added more contrast by darkening the dark areas, and then also just getting those eyes to pop. So as it stands, this is as far as I would go with this edit. I wouldn't go any further. I hope that you found some helpful information in this, and yeah, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and until next time, I'll see you then. Bye everyone.